You think you have the right to a voice here. You're the new guy. Learn your place." The room went dead silent. A few hurried nods, eyes darting downward, a smirk from the man who'd just spoken, Brad Langston, a mid-level manager at Orion Logic, and the one being humiliated, just a rookie, a programmer named Nick Barlow, who had joined the QA team less than a month ago. Nick didn't react. No arguing, no complaining. He just uttered a single sentence, short, clear, and as precise as a line of debug code. "I reviewed the full logs from last night. The configuration resets during the deployment step. It wasn't Emily's fault." No one spoke up. No one came to his side. Not a single word of defense. And exactly 18 hours later, he was fired. It happened so quietly. No one even saw the cut. A short email from HR, a deactivated keycard, an empty desk that no one asked about. And of course, the man who had humiliated him, Brad, was still there, excitedly talking about a new deadline as if nothing had ever happened. But what no one, not even Brad, knew was this Nick Barlow didn't exist. He wasn't the new employee, not just some ordinary QA engineer. He didn't come from a recently dissolved startup. As his HR files stated, he was Nathan Cole, the founder and CEO of Orion Logic, one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the East Coast. And what he had just experienced wasn't a shock. It was the truth. Have you ever spoken up for someone and paid the price, or worse? Have you ever witnessed something wrong but chose to stay silent to protect yourself? If so, you're not alone. And if not, perhaps this video will make you think. Because this story isn't just about someone getting fired for speaking the truth. It's a wake-up call, a confrontation between power and justice, and proof that sometimes, to change an entire system, the first person to pay the price is the one who dares to say what's right. Nathan Cole had once been a reclusive programming genius who built Orion Logic from an old laptop in his mum's garage in a Philadelphia suburb. He wasn't the spotlight-loving type of CEO, no supercars, no inspirational keynotes, no neon signs welcoming you in the company lobby. The only thing he cared about the belief that good technology is built by good people. For 12 years, Nathan worked closely with every team. He sat with junior employees to debug code and worked directly with the QA team during major testing cycles. But as the company began to expand from 20 to 200, then 500 people, Nathan was forced to step back. Meetings replaced dialogue. Summarized reports replaced direct voices, and the truth, gradually, was made more palatable with PowerPoint. Over the past year, Nathan started to feel Orion Logic was no longer itself. There were too many carefully crafted emails, too many phrases like, "We are looking into it." Too many metrics that looked beautiful, but the feeling was hollow. Even worse, signals began to appear that every CEO hates to believe. A few resignation letters from veteran employees, with no clear reasons. An anonymous survey showing that many people did not feel safe speaking the truth. An email he only happened to see by chance. "Don't let Nathan know. We'll handle that internally." Nathan no longer wanted to be the CEO of a company that he himself no longer believed he understood. So, he decided to do something no one would expect. He resigned, but only on internal paperwork. On the outside, he was still the CEO. But on the inside, he vanished. He shaved his salt and pepper hair, changed his walk, altered his voice, and created a new profile for Nick Barlow, a low-level QA engineer from a recently acquired startup out west. A profile real enough that no one would suspect a thing. A newly issued Orion email address. An ID card with a picture no one would pay attention to. And just a few days later, Nick, the new guy, stepped into the fourth-floor west wing of Orion Logic, a place no one fought to get assigned to. That west wing was where the fluorescent lights always flickered. The office chairs creaked. The air conditioning leaked water in the winter, and the Jenkins system crashed 3 times a week. But Nathan realized something more important. This was where the real people were, trying to keep this company from falling apart. They didn't receive praise. No one knew their names. But every line of code, every build, they were the ones who did the final check. And among them, the most outstanding was Emily Chen. She wasn't loud, not a standout. But the way she checked every system parameter, the way she spoke to junior colleagues with incredible patience, and the way she silently fixed bugs without demanding credit, made Nathan, for the first time in years, feel the reason he had once loved technology. There was just one problem. Emily was constantly treated unfairly, and the one causing it was none other than her direct manager, Brad Langston. The fourth floor, west wing of Orion Logic, always had a strange atmosphere, not exactly tense, but suffocating, as if everyone there had learned to breathe softly and laugh at the right moments just to survive. This was where the integration QA team worked, a group of 10, 3 of whom were contract employees. They didn't get new machines, were never prioritized for projects, and during all-hands meetings, they were often the only team not mentioned. Their manager, Brad Langston, was the type of person who always walked into a room 5 minutes early and immediately brought the mood down. His shirt was always perfectly pressed. His shoes shined. His tone of voice condescending. But Brad's real power wasn't in his appearance. It was in how he created fear with his calmness. Brad didn't yell. He didn't use harsh words. But he knew how to make others feel small without ever raising his voice. A single question. So, you think my way of doing things is wrong in front of the whole team was enough to make Emily stay silent for the rest of the week. A slight glance when someone asked a technical question was enough to ensure Logan, a fresh out-of-college dev, never dared to speak up a second time. A midnight email criticizing a lack of proactivity sent to the whole team, with HR CC'd, made Dana cry in the office restroom the next morning. Brad didn't control the work. He controlled the psychology. And worse, he knew the system protected him. Because on paper, Brad was the one who delivered on deadlines, managed a stable team, and had no serious internal conflicts. because no one was brave enough to fill out the anonymous feedback section when they knew the person who read the summary was Brad. Emily Chen was a thorn in his side, not because she was incompetent, but because she was too decent, too honest, and worst of all, she had a good memory and took meticulous notes. Emily didn't stay silent when she saw the Jenkins logs didn't match. She wasn't afraid to ask again when a testing process seemed illogical. And every time she did, Brad wouldn't counter with logic. He would just dismiss her, assigning her the tasks that others refused, never mentioning her name in progress reports. When there was an error, he'd suggest maybe someone in QA wasn't thorough enough. Nathan, under the guise of Nick Barlow, saw it all. He sat in the corner of the room, pretending to edit a line of code, but his eyes were observing every small movement, the way Emily blinked rapidly whenever she was publicly criticized, Logan's slight bow of the head when he was belittled, the deep sighs after everyone left a meeting, sounds that never made it into a performance report. Nathan had once hoped he could explain it all away, that maybe Brad was just too used to the old model, that he wasn't aware of the hurt he was causing. But day by day, he understood it wasn't random. It was how Brad wielded power, through subtle denial, by making others doubt themselves. And what hurt Nathan the most wasn't the existence of someone like Brad. It was the fact that the entire system had let this happen for so long. It was a grim Monday morning, literally. Rain lashed against the fourth-floor windows, and the main build system had just failed in the automation pipeline, delaying the update by more than 36 hours. Emily, as usual, was the only one who had stayed up all weekend to trace the root cause. She brought a stack of printed logs with highlighted lines of config errors and walked into the sprint meeting with tired but determined eyes. Brad sat at the head of the table, holding a pen like an unspoken scepter. He didn't look at the documents Emily provided. He just leaned back, crossed his arms, and dropped a line before she could even present. "We have a delayed update, and I'm guessing." The tester, as usual, missed a basic detail. The whole room held its breath. Emily bit her lip, but still tried to speak. It wasn't a testing error. The auto-configuration variable was reset after the third batch script run. "I have the logs here." Brad cut her off, smiling faintly. "Emily, if you spent half as much time working as you do making excuses, maybe we wouldn't be in this meeting." A condescending smile, a contemptuous look, a public takedown, and everyone looked away, except for one person. At the end of the table, Nick Barlow, the new, quiet programmer, put his coffee cup down, leaned forward, and said, very softly, not at all aggressive, "I reviewed the full logs from last night. The error isn't in the testing. The configuration was overwritten after the third batch run. Emily is correct." Silence. Every eye turned to Nick, stunned. No one had ever contradicted Brad, especially not a new employee who had just barely passed his probationary period. Brad narrowed his eyes. He lifted his hand from the armrest, slowly turning toward Nick. His voice wasn't loud, but each word cut through the air. "You think you're qualified to argue here? You're a rookie. You're here to learn, not to interrupt." Nick didn't reply. He just looked straight at Brad, a gaze without fear, without challenge, just the truth, standing still in the middle of a storm. No one else said a word. The meeting continued. Brad moved past the topic as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere had changed. The silence was no longer compliance. It was a quiet tremor. When the meeting ended, Emily gave Nick a silent nod, not a thank you, just a look of understanding between two people who had been targeted. But the price for the truth always comes sooner than you think. At noon the next day, Nick's keycard wouldn't open the door to the work area, a cold email from Human Resources. After reviewing the incident that caused conflict during the QA team meeting, the company has decided to terminate the contract of Nick Barlow for violating the principle of team cohesion. No hearing, no discussion, no one called to ask what happened. A new guy, quiet, no scandals, never caused trouble, was erased just for speaking the truth. No one reacted. No one defended him. And the most painful part, no one was surprised. Nick left the building in silence. Not a single goodbye, not a single lingering glance. Brad continued his 2 p.m. meeting, as if nothing had changed at all. But one thing had changed, forever. Orion Logic had just accidentally fired its own founder. And that man, though he left in silence, had seen enough, and he would not be silent anymore. Nathan Cole, who once managed multi-million-dollar plans, now sat alone in a small coffee shop on 8th Avenue, his shoulders damp with rain. The deactivated Orion Logic keycard lying cold in his jacket pocket. He didn't feel angry. Not yet. At least. The weight in his chest wasn't the sting of being insulted, but a feeling of being broken, as if he had just watched the very thing he had nurtured for 12 years slowly turn into a soulless machine. He had built this company to protect people like Emily, but now the company itself was using rules and polished language to push them to the fringe. And he, the founder of every decent principle in the company culture, had been kicked out of the system like a bug report. They don't need me anymore. They don't recognize me. And that's the problem. The initial shock gradually gave way to a different kind of silence. The silence of a truth you can no longer pretend not to see. Nathan returned to his small apartment on the west side of the city, the same place where he'd written his first lines of code. He turned on his old laptop, pulled a chair to the desk, and took a handwritten notebook from the pocket of his hoodie, which was still stained with a coffee splash from the day before. Inside were the notes he had written over the past 3 weeks. As Nick Barlow, Brad belittled Emily in front of the team. No one reacted. Logan was mocked for asking about a config variable. Silence afterward. Dana proposed an improvement, was rejected without a reason. Emily stayed up for 3 weekends in a row to patch bugs. No one mentioned her effort. A contract engineer asked about mentorship. Brad said, "There's no time to babysit anyone." Each line was a cut. Not big, not bleeding, but fatal if left for too long. He stared at the notebook, not as a leader, but as a father watching his own child be silently hurt. by the very values he had once taught it. And that was the moment every emotion inside Nathan ignited, not for revenge, but to fix what he had allowed to break. While the fourth floor continued to operate as usual, with Brad leading sprint meetings as if nothing had ever happened, elsewhere, a plan was being quietly set in motion. Nathan began to filter through the list of employees he had observed. He matched names to behaviors, re-verifying every HR report that had been masked with deceptive corporate language. Not a good cultural fit. Reacted poorly in a high-pressure environment. Negatively impacted team morale. It was all a cover for systemic suppression. And this time, he wasn't going to send an email. No meeting invites. No surveys. He was going to show up, as himself, with his real authority. I'm not coming back to reclaim my position. I'm coming back to reclaim the soul of this company. Because if I, the CEO, don't dare to stand up, then what right do I have to protect those who are standing alone? At 7:46 p.m., a blank subject line appeared in Brad Langston's Outlook inbox, containing only a single internal meeting invitation. Room 16B, executive level, 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Sender N. Cole. Brad frowned. He'd never had a direct interaction with Nathan Cole. Aside from a few all-hands meetings 2 years prior. But this email, it didn't feel like an invitation for a discussion. It felt like a summons. The next morning, Brad wore a freshly ironed shirt, retying his tie twice. Though no one had said anything, he felt a slight churn in his stomach. Something was off. He stepped out of the elevator on the 16th floor, a level reserved for the executive team, and the receptionist simply nodded him through. No check-in required, even more unusual. Room 16B was silent. The lighting was just bright enough. Inside was only a long conference table, leather chairs, and drawn blinds. And at the head of the table, it wasn't a director of HR or the head of compliance. It was Nathan Cole himself. No blazer, no slide deck, no assistant by his side. Just a man, sitting there, with a leather-bound folder placed in front of him. Brad froze. "Sit," Nathan said. Not loudly, no smile, just the voice of a man who had heard enough to not need to hear any more. Brad reluctantly sat down. His heart was beating faster than he'd expected. Before he could say a word, Nathan gently pushed the folder toward him. Inside was a printout of an internal Slack chat, highlighted in yellow. "Does that guy think he's a hero? He just made me lose face in front of the team. HR handled it. Don't worry. Just use the not a good culture fit excuse and it's done." Brad felt the blood drain from his face. Another line, also from his account, sent to a fellow manager. "That rookie. I'll push him out soon." He poked his nose in the wrong place. He looked up. He met Nathan's eyes for the first time in his life, looking straight at him, unblinking, unflinching. Nathan spoke, his voice low and steady. "You know who I am, but I also know who you are. better than any report ever written. Brad opened his mouth. I didn't mean to. Quiet. Nathan didn't shout, but the word was enough to cut him off. You're not here to make excuses. You're here to listen, because I have sat in your meetings. I have watched you humiliate employees, take credit, and destroy the morale I spent 12 years building. Brad stammered. I didn't know, or didn't care, Nathan interrupted. And that is precisely why you are sitting here. He stood up, walking around the table. His voice was softer now, but his words were as sharp as a scalpel. I don't need a scandal. I don't want the media to make a scene, but I will give this company a transfusion, starting with the very first person who forced me to take off my disguise and stand up. Nathan stopped behind Brad's chair, speaking softly. You're being reassigned, effective immediately. No more team, no more approval authority. You will work in the moral restructuring division at our Boston office. If I ever hear your name associated with silencing an employee's voice again. He leaned his head closer. I won't be sending a meeting invite. I'll be sending a letter from my lawyer. Brad said nothing. There was nothing left to say. As he walked out of the conference room, his legs felt noticeably weak, and Nathan, who had already stood up and left first, had turned his back on the silence. But this time, he wasn't leaving to disappear, but to begin stepping into the light, because the next battle wouldn't be just between two men. The announcement of an emergency town hall sent the entire Orion Logic building buzzing. Never before had an all-hands meeting been called with just 24 hours' notice. No agenda, no pre-sent slides. No one knew who the main speaker was. But the words, all employees required to attend HQ New York, were enough to make everyone understand something big was happening. Thursday, 10:00 a.m., the ground floor auditorium. Over 400 employees sat packed together. All eyes were fixed on the small stage at the front, where there was no moderator's table, no host's microphone set up, just a single, lone microphone stand under a direct spotlight. And then Nathan Cole walked out. No suit, no leather shoes, just a dark blue hoodie, the same familiar one worn by Nick Barlow. The entire hall fell silent. Those who had worked on the 4th floor began to whisper. Emily Chen clenched her fists in her lap. Logan looked up, his eyes wide with astonishment. Nathan stood still for a few seconds, not looking at anyone in particular. Then he began, his voice clear but calm. I want to tell you a story about a new guy who joined the company. Quiet, came in early, left late. He was hard-working. He tried, but he also saw things that weren't right. He saw a colleague blamed unfairly. He saw talented people being overlooked. He saw voices being silenced. And then, one day, he decided to speak up. He told the truth. The result, he was fired. In silence. The entire auditorium was dead silent. Some of you worked with that person. Some of you sat in the same meeting. Some of you were silent when it happened, and some helped push him out of the company. Nathan took a breath. That person was me. The air exploded. Gasps. A few people covered their mouths. Some stood up. Others whispered, "No way." Those who had met Nick couldn't believe their eyes. Nathan raised a hand gently, as if to hold back the new silence that was about to spill over again. "I didn't go undercover to test anyone. I did it because I no longer believed what I was hearing in reports. And I was right. What I saw hurt me more than any declining metric ever could." He turned his back, pointing to the LED screen behind him, which now displayed a single line of white text, "Courage to speak." "Starting today, we begin again. We will establish a fully protected, anonymous reporting channel, one that doesn't just record, but has a clear responsibility to respond. We will implement an internal mentorship network, led by those who were once silent and learned how to stand up. And we will evaluate our leaders not just on their performance, but on how they protect others." The applause started scattered, then grew louder, then erupted. But Nathan wasn't finished. He looked toward the front row, where a young woman was trembling slightly. Emily Chen. "Emily," he called, his voice softening. "You held on to your integrity when no one stood with you. You were pushed to the edge and still chose not to push anyone else off. Orion needs people like you, not just to test software, but to test the very culture of this company." He held out a white card. It had no job title, just one line of text: "Culture Lead, QA Rebuild Initiative. I want you to lead the team to rebuild what we've lost." Emily said nothing. She just walked onto the stage, took the card, and then nodded firmly. The entire hall rose to their feet, not for Nathan, but for Emily, and for a belief that was being reborn, that this place could truly change. The morning after the town hall, the door to the 4th floor, once the most silent hollow of Orion logic, opened earlier than usual. Emily Chen walked in, no longer the ignored QA employee, no longer the person who shouldered blame for others without her name ever being mentioned, but the culture lead of the QA Integration Rebuild program. But she didn't walk in with an assistant, no loud directives, no company-wide CC'd email. She just walked in, just as she had for the past 2 years, quietly, steadfastly, and this time with the authority to act. The first thing she did wasn't to call a team meeting, nor was it to rewrite procedures. It was to knock on each desk, to sit down next to Dana, the young engineer who had once been mocked for her improvement suggestions, to invite Logan, the shy young man who often avoided eye contact, out for coffee, to send a private message to each contract employee, thanking them for helping the team through the worst months. She didn't ask, "What do you need from the organization?" She asked, "What do I need to fix so you don't feel like you have to choose between surviving and speaking up?" The first week, Emily just listened. The second week, she met privately with HR to redesign the entire internal feedback process, demanding a mandatory response step and removing approval by direct manager from all violation reports. The third week, she proposed a small change that made a huge difference. Each engineering team must have at least one mental health advocate. someone outside the hierarchy, but empowered to support employees during internal conflicts. And she was the first to sign up for that position for the QA team, not for the title, but because she had once been the person who needed someone like that, and had no one. Slowly, the atmosphere on the fourth floor changed. Dana started turning on her camera during online meetings. Logan smiled for the first time in a sprint meeting when his suggestion was met with, "That's a good idea." An intern dared to give feedback on the onboarding documents, and instead of being scolded, was invited to join the improvement team. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The fear was slowly disappearing. During a restructuring meeting at the end of the month, Emily said something that made the entire room sit in silence for a long time. "We can't rewrite the past, but we can create a system where if the old story repeats itself, it will no longer be able to survive." No one clapped, but everyone nodded. And that was what she needed, not outward support, but true commitment. Nathan Cole watched from a distance. He didn't interfere. He didn't direct. He would only occasionally send a message, "Whatever you need, let me know. I'm not here to supervise. I'm here to make sure you have the power to act." Someone asked Emily why she didn't react more strongly, why she didn't sue Brad, go to the press, or demand justice. She just smiled, softly. "True justice isn't about making the guilty pay. Justice is ensuring the righteous are never left to stand alone again." Boston. A gloomy Monday morning. In a satellite building of Orion Logic, home to the Compliance Restructure Division, Brad Langston sat alone at a desk pushed against a glass window, where the sunlight always reflected directly onto his computer screen, making it hard to see. No more big conference table, no more list of direct reports, no more approval authority, no more Brad, the man who could once silence the entire fourth floor with a single look. Now, he was just an entry on the internal employee transfer list. Every morning, Brad had to attend a mandatory ethics training session via Zoom, along with dozens of other employees who had violated company policy. The trainer spoke in a monotone voice, trying to spark a discussion that no one responded to. Brad didn't speak. No one asked him to. The Zoom chat displayed his name, but no one mentioned it. No one typed, "Hi, Brad." No one asked for his opinion. The silence, for the first time, no longer served him. It was suffocating him. He had thought someone would defend him, but no one emailed him after Nathan's public town hall. Not a single one of his former team members asked, "Are you okay?" Not one person who had laughed with him in the shared coffee kitchen spoke up. Brad began to realize something. He hadn't just lost his position. He had lost his people, or perhaps he never had them in the first place. Every week, Brad had to write a reflection on a workplace conduct scenario, describing what he could have done differently. Soulless Word documents, stiff sentences, reasons that sounded right, but that no one believed. One day, during his lunch break, Brad overheard two compliance employees talking about Emily. She was just nominated to oversee the entire mentorship program for the global QA system. She revised the HR feedback template. Now new hires don't get crushed like they used to. I heard. She was pushed down by Brad Langston himself. Now look. Brad stood up, leaving his lunch half-eaten. In the afternoon meeting that day, when the supervisor asked everyone to name a leader who has inspired you, Brad remained silent, not because he couldn't think of anyone, but because the only name that came to his mind was the very person he had tried to extinguish, Emily Chen. And that, for Brad, was more painful than any punishment. There was no termination letter, no final meeting. Brad was still a legal employee of Orion Logic, but he knew he was no longer a part of this company. And the cruelest part was no one cared anymore. One day, walking down a hallway, Brad glanced through the frosted glass of a conference room. Inside was a group of young employees. A meeting had just ended, and they were laughing, exchanging documents. On the wall, a new sign had been hung. One courageous voice can save an entire system. M.B. He stopped. His lips tightened. M.B. Mike Barlow. That simple name, the person who had made him lose his composure with a single sentence, had now become a symbol for a company he once ruled in silence. Brad walked on, slowly. No one turned to greet him anymore. No one feared him anymore. And strangely, that was the real punishment. There was no "the CEO is back" announcement, no welcome banners, no internal email saying, "We are thrilled to have Nathan back at headquarters." And that was exactly how he wanted it. Because Nathan Cole didn't come back to be CEO the old way. He didn't need a private office, didn't need a secretary, didn't need the kind of power that comes from being the first to be briefed on everything. Instead, he walked the hallways like a regular employee, shirt casually buttoned, wearing an ID just like everyone else, laptop slung over his shoulder, stopping by the first-floor coffee shop like anyone else. He would often sit at the empty tables at the back of conference rooms, quietly observing teams discuss their work. Occasionally, he'd send a Slack message to a junior engineer. "That idea you brought up in this morning's brainstorm was really valuable. Keep it up." It took a few days for people to believe they weren't seeing things. The CEO just sat next to me for 30 minutes in the code review area, just to ask, "Is the new system helping you feel less stressed?" He slacked me to ask if I found the anonymous feedback process easy to use. He laughed when I said, "The build failed 3 times in a row and no one yelled at me," which is a rare thing. Emily Chen, now a strategic advisor for the Internal Reform Project, jokingly called Nathan the Ghost Walker, someone who walked through the old system like a ghost of its former ideals. But this time, he had returned to remind everyone that it was still alive. They didn't have scheduled meetings. They would often talk while waiting for coffee at the automatic machine on the second floor. Once, Emily asked him, "Do you regret going undercover?" Nathan just smiled. "No, I regret that it took getting fired for me to fully see what I had let slip through my fingers." The values that Nathan had written in the company culture deck 10 years ago were now being rewritten, but not with PR language, but with small actions. An intern proposed a process improvement, and it was put directly onto the roadmap. A team lead publicly admitted a mistake and was thanked for their honesty. An employee who had once been threatened with termination by Brad was now the QA team lead at a newly opened branch in Seattle. There was no media campaign, no press conference to show off achievements, just the sound of laughter returning to a place that was once a dead zone of suffocation. Nathan didn't show up at every meeting, but when he dropped by the 4th floor, walking past the QA integration area, which was once the battleground for Emily, Logan, and Dana, he didn't go in. He just stood outside, listening to the sound of keyboards tapping, the lively debates, the sound of people daring to say what they truly thought. Then he smiled, a small, sufficient smile, and walked on, because sometimes a leader doesn't need to sit at the front, but just needs to make sure that no one is left behind. 3 months later, the Orion Logic office hadn't changed much in appearance. Still the long glass windows, the old elevator that went ting at every stop, and the 3rd floor coffee machine that still jammed on fresh milk every Monday morning. But one thing was very different. People started to believe they could speak the truth and be heard. Emily Chen was no longer just a QA engineer or a reform team lead. She was a living symbol of a simple truth. The greatest strength isn't in speaking the loudest, but in not backing down, even when you're standing alone. She didn't need a private office, no glossy business cards, but in every important meeting, when there was a tense debate about personnel, ethics, or culture, people would turn and ask, "What does Emily think?" And when she answered, people listened, not because of her title, but because of the past she had lived through. Logan, once the young dev who always looked down, was now a mentor for the summer intern group. Dana, the girl who used to turn off her camera in every meeting, now stood before the entire company, presenting an improvement to the testing process. She ended her presentation with a sentence that silenced the room. "Last year, I used to wonder if I was good enough to survive here. Now, I don't ask that question anymore. I ask, how can we make sure the people who come after me never have to ask themselves that question again?" The 4th floor, once called the technical cold zone, was now the place where all reforms were first tested. The whiteboard, once used for blame, was now covered in thank you sticky notes. The once silent Slack channel was now where people told jokes at the end of the day. The war room, where Emily once sat alone, now hosted listening hours every Friday. Brad Langston in Boston was still working, still arriving on time, still attending all meetings, but no one mentioned his name in updates anymore. He had become a number, no longer a voice. And Nathan Cole. He still hadn't returned to the CEO's office. He didn't need to. He knew he had done the most important thing a leader can do: stop a bad system from continuing to devour good people. One late afternoon, he stood outside the 4th floor conference room, where the QA teams were discussing how to create a toolkit for assessing team ethics. Laughter erupted. Someone joked, if Mike Barlow were here, he'd probably advise adding a rule, don't scold a junior dev in front of the whole team. The whole room laughed. Nathan stood still. He didn't go in. He just stood there and smiled. No one saw him, and he no longer needed to be seen. Because some victories don't need recognition, and some people change an entire system, then quietly step aside to let others step up. This isn't just a story about a CEO in disguise, not just a story about someone fired for speaking the truth, nor is it about punishment for the guilty. It's about something much more important. What happens when one person refuses to be silent and chooses to stand up, knowing the price is themselves? Orion logic wasn't perfect. It had made mistakes. It had been silent. It had let power overshadow dignity. But then, in its darkest moment, one person chose not to turn away. And from that, many others stepped out of their own silence. Emily, once sidelined, now the heart of the change. Logan, once trembling over a question, now the one who speaks up for the next generation. Nathan, once at the peak of power, now walking among his people like a night watchman, ensuring no one is left behind. There is no roadmap for justice, no KPI for decency. But there are moments, very small ones, when one person chooses not to bow their head. And that very moment can save an entire system. Silence is the most contagious thing in the workplace. But so is courage. And if you are in a place where decency makes you an outcast, remember, you might just be the first step to changing everything. Some people leave because they aren't good enough, but many people leave because no one would believe they deserve to stay. If you have ever stayed silent out of fear, you are not alone. But if one day you choose to speak up, you could become the reason why someone else doesn't disappear as quietly as you almost did. Don't wait until you've lost everything to realize the truth doesn't need a strong person. It just needs someone who won't abandon it.